very civil conversation, very unlike what happened the first time that President Zelensky was in the White House and got a massive dressing down. This time, very, very civil. But the message, if not the same, was similar. The world is tired of the Russia-Ukraine war. Russians are tired, Ukrainians are tired, the world is tired. But that question of ceasefire, will Ukraine have to cede territory for that ceasefire? And how much territory will Ukraine have to cede? Of course, this time, the Ukrainian president is also well fortified. Of course, he's suited up, but then there are 7 top European leaders, from the British Prime Minister to the French President, from the German Chancellor to the UN, to the EU and NATO chiefs there with him. So he's well stocked, well armed, well fortified for this conversation. Let's now throw this open for a wider conversation. What do we expect from the dialogue, the one-on-one dialogue that's happening now, and the dialogue that will happen with the European leaders? Joining me on this special broadcast, Geeta Mohan, India Today's Foreign Affairs editor. Sasha Alexandrenko is a journalist who joins us from Ukraine. Sasha, welcome. Seema Sirohi is a well-respected journalist and columnist, joins us from Washington, D.C. Daniel Block, editor of Foreign Affairs magazine, joins us from New York. Ambassador Ashok Sajjanhar with me on this, as is Sushant Sareen, senior fellow at the Observer Research Foundation. And Sasha, let me begin by asking you, okay, Sasha, what do we expect? Sasha, what do we expect from this conversation? Is Ukraine willing to cede territory for ceasefire, or is ceding territory completely off the table?
Good evening, everybody. Thank you for this translation. So I would say that, of course, people of Ukraine and community, they want to have very, very careful hope for the best and for the ceasefire. But for now, all experience of Ukrainian population, it's every time the ceasefire was announced by Russian Federation, so it never happened. So if there will be no very powerful statements or very powerful sayings from European leaders, from USA leader, so what's going to happen to Russia if they will not follow their promises? I think it's just another talk about ceasefire or about peaceful negotiation, which unfortunately leads to nowhere and make no changes for Ukraine and for Ukrainian population.
Seema Sirohi, in the way you look at this situation, President Trump's meeting with President Putin, now meeting President Zelensky, and with 7 top European leaders there at the White House in Washington, D.C. right now, what kind of forward movement can we expect?
Well, the best forward movement would be the trilateral meeting that President Trump talked about, but there's a lot to happen.
Okay, give me a moment. I think I've lost your link. Let me also bring in Rohit Sharma, who joins us from Washington, D.C. Rohit, what's the buzz in D.C.? Will this, as Seema Sirohi was just telling us, lead to a trilateral Russia, Ukraine, US? And what are all the European heads of state and government saying?
Well, look, Gaurav, they had a good, I think, meeting at the embassy, at the Ukrainian embassy, right before they all came to the White House, except for Macron, who directly came from the airport to the White House. They want to achieve peace. They want to be able to nudge President Trump to get a little tough on Russia. I think their concern is that, they don't want to bully Ukraine to be giving up too much territory. So that's number one. The other thing is, that, as you saw President Trump talk about, that he's hopeful for a trilateral. He's saying that it is possible. We'll have to wait and watch how the things pan out. They just headed into a bilateral. They will go into, all the leaders will be meeting with President Trump right now. So the first concern that every European leader has is that they want security guarantee for Ukraine, and B, they do not want to have anybody bully Ukrainians into giving too much territory. So we'll have to wait and watch on that. But I think those are 2 things on mind of all the European leaders who are at the White House right now.
Okay. Ambassador Sajjanhar, Do you see forward movement? What's changed between February and now, post that meeting with President Putin? Is President Trump indicating no more weapons, no more giving any free weapons to Ukraine? Europe will have to pay for it. Some air defense systems yet, but the war has to end. Is that the impression you get?
Well, as far as the weaponry is concerned, Gaurav, first of all, thank you very much for having me on the show. As far as weaponry is concerned, definitely, this has been made clear quite some time. Even the last time when the consignment of weaponry had gone from the United States, I think all the American leaders, including Trump, Rubio, Vance, were sort of, backslapping each other and complimenting each other that they were not giving free weapons and that they were being sold and NATO would be paying for them. So I think that has been the pattern that has been set after Trump has come in. But I think as far as peace is concerned, Gaurav, I have, what Mr. Trump is doing is really presenting some sort of a fait accompli to Europe and to Ukraine. Because, there have been informed leaks that have been brought out saying that Ukraine will have to cede territory, including Crimea and some of the others, and also that NATO membership is off the table. So this seems to be, this is something that it appears Mr. Trump has agreed as far with Mr. Putin when he met him in Alaska. So it doesn't leave any further scope for, any flexibility or any negotiation or any maneuvering on the part of Ukraine and Europe.
Okay,
We
but
really
all
have to
these
wait.
all these 7 leaders who've come, and I've got their entire list, Sushant Sareen and Geeta, weigh in on this in just a moment. From Friedrich Merz, the German Chancellor, to Emmanuel Macron, the French President, to Keir Starmer, British Prime Minister, Giorgia Meloni, Italian Prime Minister, Alexander Stubb, the Finnish President, Ursula von der Leyen, EU President Mark Rutte, NATO General Secretary, the coalition of the willing, Sushant Sareen. Is this for emotional support, or do they want Trump to continue arming Ukraine and this war to continue? Because Emmanuel Macron seemed to indicate that in case Russia is seen as a victor, there'll be trouble for other countries in future.
Yeah, so the problem is going to be that there could be other trouble for other countries, but do they really want this war to continue? Maybe Western Europe wants the war to continue because they are really not losing people, and it's not their territory that's getting the bomb the hell out of. But I think even for the Ukrainians, it's going to be a very difficult job to accept the loss of territory. Look, Gaurav, we know, everybody knows around the world that accepting loss of territory is the single most difficult thing for any sovereign country to accept. So I think one should look at the predicament of the Ukrainians. But then the problem is, what is the choice? By all accounts, there are only bad options. Either you let the war continue and thousands of people more will die, or you accept a bad deal, which is probably the best of bad deals, and try and get some kind of peace. But then the devil will be in the detail. Will whatever territory is ceded, will it be permanent or will it be temporary?
Okay.
What will be the security guarantees? What will be the nature of those security guarantees? The Russians want that Ukraine be completely disarmed. Will that be on the table? Will that not be on the table?
Totally disarmed and denazified is the terminology that Trump is using, but that may well be a maximalist position. Sushant Sareen, give me a moment as I bring in Geeta Mohan into this conversation, because Geeta, President Putin was very clear. He's not in this for a temporary ceasefire. He wants a permanent settlement, and from what our analysts seem to indicate, that there is no LOC kind of a situation that he wants, that you'll have a festering border with Ukraine. He wants it very clear, no military at the borders, no Ukrainian forces at the borders to target the new Russian territory.
Well, absolutely, Gaurav. Even before the two sides went into a conversation, remember, the US president did not take so many questions from reporters as he did with Zelensky last time around and this time around as well. With Putin, the moment the leaders came in, the press secretary, it was the American side that kept saying, okay, thank you, please leave the room, please leave the room. They did not want any questions because they did not want anything that could scuttle those talks that were really critical and important. And he had already walked back on the demand for immediate ceasefire. So he already knew what the Russians really are coming in to speak on, and the plan was in place. Whether it's Russia-US bilateral or for that matter, what it means to have peace. And like you said, it was not temporary in nature. It's not a ceasefire. He wants complete understanding and clarity on acceptance, on endorsement when it comes to the Donbas region, that's Donetsk and Luhansk, and certainly Crimea. I would have thought it would have gone as far as Zaporizhia nuclear power plant, but that's something that's not been reported or in conversation. So let's see what the conversation today is going to be on Zaporizhia, Kherson, Odessa, but certainly not Donbas and Crimea, which for Russia are off the negotiating table.
So before we listen into what Donald Trump had to say and President Zelensky had to say, Sasha, let's take this region by region. Initially, Sasha, President Zelensky had indicated there will be no question of ceding any territory. But territories that Russia had in control, for example, since 2014, Crimea, or territory that they had in control, for example, 80% of the Donbas region, Donetsk and Luhansk, will President Zelensky be in a position to cede these territories? I'm not even coming to Zaporizhia and Kherson, and Zaporizhia has the nuclear power plant. What will be the repercussions if he has to cede these territories to Russia?
I think that President Zelensky now is a very difficult position because for him to declare that territories, we are talking about territories that was annexated since 2014, like Crimea Peninsula and partly Donetsk and Luhansk region. So his promise to Ukrainian people was not to give up on the territories, and we are still have a huge amount of people who are living on that territory and who are waiting to Ukraine to come back. So in order to not to have all the anger of the military personnel of Ukraine and their families and all the community, President Zelensky should follow his promise and try to negotiate all the territories of Ukraine to come back. Otherwise, so it's legalized annexion of the territories for all the countries in Europe, USA, and even Asia. So it's a quite difficult position and quite difficult situation for Ukrainian president for now.
Indeed, Ambassador Sajjanhar, it would appear as, Sushant Sareen was just telling us, the choice is between bad and bad, or from bad to worse, whether he accepts the war that continues or ceding territory, which would be disastrous for his presidency.
No, you're right, Gaurav. I think one really has to look at the least worst of all the bad proposals that are on the table. And I think some sort of, one is the absolute ideal position, which is, what is in the Ukrainian constitution, which President Zelensky has also been mentioning, that there will be no ceding of territory. But, there is something also called Realpolitik. And,
Yes.
If you have, Crimea has now been with Russia for the last 11 years, since 2014, February of 2014. And also we see that at least the two provinces that have been claimed, whether it's the Donbas, the Donetsk, and the Luhansk, those, I think it will be extremely difficult for Europe, for Ukraine, and the West to recover. I think the best case scenario would be really if Zaporizhia and Kherson, if they can be retained, and what are these security guarantees? Because what Putin is trying to do is to say that, there'll be no NATO forces in terms of Ukrainian army also, it will be severely limited. Now, that is basically significantly compromising the security of Ukraine.
Okay.
And I think those are aspects on which possibly discussions can take place.
And Rohit, best case scenario is forward movement is a trilateral between President Zelensky, President Putin, and President Trump. The European leaders, and you've been able to speak to some of their teams, are they here for just moral support, or are they here to say, continue giving them weapons? Europe will pay, if Europe has enough funds to pay, given the situation that they're facing. So, what is that broader strategy? Okay, you're on mute, Rohit.
No, I think you can hear me. Can you hear me now?
Yeah, go on.
I'm sorry, apologies. So one of the things that was discussed this morning was about the fact that, how will this meeting today, or these meetings, would go, right? And one of the things they talked about was that the security guarantee is the most important thing, and that's the first thing that the European want, and they're coming in to support Zelensky on that. That's the first thing. The second thing, I think, what they're trying to do is they're trying to look at what was proposed by Vladimir Putin as those territorial concessions, and it is assumed at this point in time that he's going to take back to his country, and then talk about and sell it to his audience or his people. This is what he should do or shouldn't do. So I think nobody's expecting a realistic, ceasefire or end of the war today, or not even, a trilateral summit, a date to come out of it today. I think the goal is to make sure that Zelensky can understand what the US is asking, or are relaying what the Russians have told the Americans, and then the Zelensky and the Europeans can talk about the security
Okay.
guarantees. The other thing is, and this is very interesting, Gaurav, is the fact that Zelensky must take these back to home, because the Ukrainian constitution requires a national referendum for
Yes.
any territorial changes. And this is a problem. And obviously, the Europeans are saying that's his problem to figure out. But that's been his talking line. That's what he said in this morning's meeting at the embassy in Ukraine. So there are a lot of concerns at this point in time, but there's no timeline. And as far as President Trump and the Americans are concerned, they just want to keep the momentum going. So yes, you heard President Trump say, we'll talk about the trilateral. I think that's what he wants to do,
So,
but he
Seema
wants to do
Sirohi,
sooner.
okay, Seema Sirohi, one is optics, the other is what's happening behind the scenes. So optics are all great. This time, President Zelensky is also suited up. When he was, ushered into the White House, it was very cordial, very polite, unlike what had happened in February, March. But beyond that, what do we realistically expect? End of the road for military supplies to Ukraine to be able to sustain this war? Because President Trump's also making it very clear, we're not giving them anything, we are selling it, and Europe is paying for it.
Exactly. So this is where the rubber hits the road for Europe, and they've all come, en masse to DC. One to stiffen, Zelensky's back, but also to sort of show solidarity. They will have to increase their defense budgets. They'll have to buy American weapons if they want to do a serious sort of security presence in Ukraine. So, in terms of this Article 5 thing, I think there's a big step forward by President Trump to even
Mention it.
begin to talk about the fact that the Americans will, in some manner, support the idea of helping to defend Ukraine. If the peace agreement goes through, if the land territory, they call it swap, but I don't think it's a swap. It's like ceding of Ukrainian territory. If all that goes through, if it's acceptable to the Ukrainians, thing is, everyone's tired of this
Yes.
war. And the point is, maybe Putin made a maximalist, offer in his meeting in Alaska. He will come back a little bit, but he's going to also have to answer to his people, what did he win from this war after,
Yes.
putting thousands and thousands and thousands of Russians to death. So he's got to show some gain in terms of some territory. So
And that
that's
territory has to go beyond the Donetsk and Luhansk region that he had. 88% is what he perhaps has now, from 75 to 88. Crimea he had. So can he retain Zaporozhye and Kherson? And we're not even talking about Sumy or Kharkiv pockets there that he has under his control, according to media reports. Daniel Block, senior editor of Foreign Affairs magazine, New York, joins me on the broadcast. And Daniel, from whatever you've heard from President Zelensky and President Trump, the conversations different from the one that they had in February, but overall, what's the big expectation from this meeting for you?
I think it's hard to say right now because, as you rightly noted earlier, there's what we see happening publicly, and then there's what's happening behind the scenes. That said, I think the fact that this didn't end with a blow-up between Trump and Zelensky will be a positive side for the Ukrainians. And I think that what they're really hoping is that, in combination with the other leaders in Europe, they can persuade Trump to continue leaving open channels for them to purchase military equipment to send to Ukraine. I think they still regard it as extremely unlikely that there's going to be a negotiated settlement to the war in Ukraine right now. The sense I have from what Ukrainians have said, from the way the Europeans feel, and from basically the offers that Putin has put forward, is that while obviously everybody is tired of the fighting and of the war, there's no deal to be had that will leave the Ukrainians happy. And understandably so. I mean, Putin is demanding that Ukraine hand over territory that it still currently controls. So I think right now what Ukraine and its allies are looking to do are to keep the pathway for American support open. That's the goal. That's the hope. And whether or not they'll succeed, well, we'll find out.
Sushant Sareen, one part is getting military hardware. The other part is having trained manpower to be able to operate it. Because a system like the Patriot system, to be able to use it effectively, you'd need to spend not weeks but months and months to be able to master that technology. Does Ukraine have that kind of manpower and that kind of trained manpower to operate all the military hardware that may be coming in?
Gaurav, the problem is not just about the trained manpower. The problem is also going to be, will the Ukrainians be able to get enough people in their army?
Yes.
There are so many reports about people not wanting to join the war, they're trying to duck the conscription that is taking place. And the army is being denuded of soldiers, partly because of casualties, partly because many people don't want to join the fight, right? And you literally are forcing people to join the army. Now, there could be some exaggeration in those reports, but nevertheless, the fact of the matter remains that there is a manpower crisis, not just in terms of training, but in sheer numbers. So there is that crisis as well. Now, you can carry on this war, and like I said, it's very easy for the British to say that, guys, carry on fighting. That has been British policy for 500 years. Make others fight and sit on the sidelines and make a profit of the war. So the Brits would want to do it. Some of the other continental European countries have some genuine concerns about Russia. And maybe some kind of a deal, some kind of security guarantees can be worked out. But Gaurav, also remember one thing, there is going to be a problem for the US as well. There is a problem in terms of, can the European allies trust the US to come to their back and have their back in case of a major conflict? And one of the reasons why the Europeans are coming is also to get a measure of the United States. On trade, they've already given in. They've surrendered completely, abjectly to the US. But on security, if they have to surrender the security also to the US and go along with the whims and fancies of the American president, then where does that leave the larger transatlantic relationship? And for the Americans, the problem is going to be that if they are not even ready to deliver the weapons which the Europeans want to buy and give to Ukraine, assuming that can be done, then that entire transatlantic relationship is thrown in jeopardy. So there, not as though the Americans can simply ride roughshod and not bother about the transatlantic relationship, unless, of course, the Americans have given up on it and they're just playing this game, so that somebody can get a Nobel Peace Prize. And I can't understand this obsession with the Nobel Peace Prize. Some of the most useless people have got that prize. I don't know why everything is revolved around this one prize.
But he sincerely wants it. But Geeta, some of the European leaders you've been speaking to in the past several weeks have indicated that they're also looking at a European defense system in whatever way that's possible, given the kind of attitude President Trump has adopted in the past 6 to 8 months.
Well, absolutely. The Germans, we're speaking to a few others as well, and they are on record talking about how it is now important that they cannot have the United States of America as the net security provider for Europe, and that it was a fair ask, and they're now going to do it. They're looking at depending on each other and having a more secure system of self-defense when it comes to Russia. All that is good because it should have come to this. It should have been about Europe and European security, that they'd look after themselves in a way that they do not push countries at the behest of the United States of America to fall for the NATO narrative, which is what we're looking at, unfortunately, President Zelensky fall to. And he did speak of how Ukraine is going to join NATO before the war. He continued speaking of it through the first year of the war, only then to come out and say, well, it's quite clear now that Ukraine is never going to be a part of the NATO. So it's quite unfortunate what's happened. And now war fatigue has set in, not just in Ukraine or Russia, but in Europe as well, Gaurav. So yes, they are looking at how they now need to strengthen themselves to ensure that there is no threat beyond Ukraine in the European Union and the NATO alliance members who are critical to providing security in that part of the world.
Sasha, is there a sense of disappointment in Ukraine? Because Ukraine has fought, and they fought really hard. Geeta and I were on ground zero in Kiev, in Kharkiv, in Mariupol, in Irpin, in Bucha, and we saw how well the Ukrainians fought all along. But more than 3.5 years down the line, is there a sense of fatigue, not just internally, but the fact that supplies are dwindling, help is dwindling, resources are dwindling, and it's a lost cause?
Yeah, I know what you're talking about. I can tell you that the level of the fatigue that is happening on the fourth year of Russian invasion is terrible right now. And I would say that for now, peaceful negotiation brings only despair on the Ukrainian territory, because as I said before, after that we have horrendous rocket attacks on civilian cities. If you're talking about front line, so yeah, guys are very exhausted. Soldiers are very exhausted, but they lost so much. So in the order of their mental state, they have nothing to lose. So they are ready to go till the end. Of course, we are now in the very huge shortage of men, of manpower, of weapon, and all kind of means that you need during the war. From one hand, and from other hand, we have exhaustion of the civilian population because they are terrorized almost every night. Reported from all the big cities of the huge amount of victims among children, among women, and etc., etc., etc. So yeah, I can witness that people are desperate in their exhaustion, but still want justice and still want to fight back.
They still want to fight back, but weapon supplies are dwindling, manpower is dwindling. And Seema Sirohi, when you look at the kind of territory that's in conversation, Crimea, warm water port, there is no way that President Putin is likely to let go of this part. He wants not just Ukraine, but even Europe and America to recognize Crimea as part of Russia. Donetsk and Luhansk, that Donbas region, he's in control. Kherson, Zaporozhye, do you think he's going to let go of any of it? from the maximalist position? Because there are some experts who say, why would he let go of a nuclear power plant in Zaporozhye that he now has under his control?
Yes, see, right now it's very unclear what the understanding, quote unquote, was reached between President Trump and President Putin in Alaska. The details, Trump was uncharacteristically quiet and not loquacious. He's used to talking and not knowing when to stop.
Yes.
But in Alaska, he was keeping it close to his chest. Perhaps there are details that he has been told and that he's going to present to the Europeans and to President Zelensky to figure out what is the best, kind of give and take in terms of territory. From what I understand, in the southern part, Putin is not willing to cede anything.
Yes.
What he controls, he wants to keep controlling. So right now, it seems to me that President Trump, he is at a point where he can feel that there will be an agreement, and this would be actually, if it works out, would be a claim for a Nobel Peace Prize. Even Hillary Clinton said that.
Except that if it comes without ceding territory. And in this case, that there is no way that that will happen. And Daniel Block, when there is conversation about, Schedule 5 kind of security, clearly Ukraine can never be a part of the North Atlantic Treaty Organization. That message has gone out loud and clear. So what kind of, Rule 5 security can Europe and US think of providing Ukraine?
There have been various discussions about what a kind of peacekeeping force or contingent could look like, to what extent it would involve US troops, whether the United States might only provide air power in order to back up whatever European forces are stationed on the ground in order to prevent a Russian reinvasion. But I mean, this really is in some ways absolutely central to any negotiations or talks, because the Ukrainians do not trust Russia to uphold any agreement they make, and correctly so. I mean, Russia agreed to, various ceasefires and pauses in fighting and peace deals before this invasion of Ukraine, and then only went ahead and invaded Ukraine anyway. So it's a country, Russia, that does not have a history of standing by its words when it comes to Ukraine.
But
And
in
so
Article
there's
5
going to need to be
security,
some sort of...
is this an indication, Ambassador Sajjanhar, that European troops will be deployed in Ukraine? But if that's exactly what Russia does not want, will they permit foreign troops to be deployed in Ukrainian territory?
This is the maximalist demand of Putin. And, he has also stated what should be the number of Ukrainian troops, no foreign troops on Ukrainian territory or periphery. So, I guess as we have been speaking, as the other panelists have also been saying, this is up for negotiation, and basically that is where change could take place. But, as far as territory is concerned, it appears very unlikely that, Putin might be willing to let go of any territory that's under his control. One point I would like to make, everyone seems to suggest that, everyone wants an end to the war. And, Sasha explained it so very poignantly as to what has happened in Ukraine and what is happening there. And Ukraine definitely is the first contender that wants the war to stop. Europeans also want the war to stop because, it's a matter of their own security. One country that, does not appear to be very keen to stop the war is Russia, because, there have been over the last so many months, there have been so many offers, so many proposals that have been made for a limited ceasefire, 15 days, 1 month, etc. And none of that seems to be acceptable to Russia. And even now, so maybe they think that they are on a winning spree. They are, they might be making slow progress, but they are getting territory, wherever they are. And so the more that they are able to occupy, the more they'll be able to keep. So I
Except it
think
comes at a huge cost. The losses of lives that have taken place, even on the Russian side, the loss to their industry, so many hundred billions of dollars of theirs blocked in European banks and overseas. Sushant Sareen, does this make diplomatic or military or strategic sense for Russia to continue to push on and maximize the advantage, or would Russia want that if there is no, if there's a guarantee that NATO is not coming into Ukraine, or they ensure that, as they claim, denazification of Ukraine, then they can look at other options?
No, I think they can look at other options. What if the other option is that Ukraine will not join NATO, but NATO troops by another name will be deployed in Ukraine? Then why would the Russians accept that? It doesn't stand to logic, does it? That the French, the Germans, the rest of them will be putting their troops to guarantee Ukrainian security. I don't see how that's ever going to be acceptable to the Russians, right? That's not going to happen, or American troops coming in. And I don't see how Trump can explain American troops now being deployed in Ukraine to his own constituency. So I think there are a lot of problems in that particular arrangement which people are talking about.
Okay.
Secondly, what might happen is some kind of a iron cast guarantee. Something which happened during, for example, during the Cold War, with Austria, for example. Both sides decided that Austria is not going to be a member of NATO. It won't be a member of the Warsaw Pact. And it had a certain neutrality and nobody really interfered in it. Actually, everybody interfered in it, but
Yes.
there was no war over Austria. Something to that extent might be worked out. I don't know what
But-
the diplomats.
Okay, the
The
last
third-
30 seconds I have on this part of the show, Geeta, the Russians are also watching this very closely as they continue, according to the Ukrainians, their attacks on some of the vital assets and vital points, including, as the Ukrainians say, some civilian areas. So that ceasefire is still quite a big dream and quite far away.
Well, could be that, but Kirill Dmitriev, who is the main negotiator from the Russian side, has just put out saying that lasting peace versus temporary ceasefire. Gaurav, that's telling, because that's exactly what the conversation is going to be, whether they want permanent peace or just a temporary ceasefire. And is ceasefire important or more important than peace?
I will let that be the last word on this part of the show. To all my guests, many thanks for joining me. As this conversation continues at the White House, our reporters on ground are keeping a hawk eye on all developments.